So Cory Doctorow is an interesting figure in science fiction, and I mostly have read some of his essays and short stories. This is the only novel of his that I've read, but it has really stuck with me, and I think it's because it illustrates something really interesting, which is it's set in a post-scarcity world, and yet the same humans vying over status and having the same petty human conflicts, even in a post-scarcity world, still persists. And so wanted to talk about that. And there will be spoilers. The book starts with, I forget, there's like one introduction, sort of explaining, I think, how this post-scarcity world came about. And then the next chapters, he's talking about his girlfriend is 15% of his age because I think he's like 120 and she's like 20, which I watched some video talking about, like, when women write age gaps in romances, right? If you write a 30-year age gap, it's creepy, but if you write a 300-year age gap, it's not. And this one is very much in the place where it's uncomfortable, and he has the character acknowledge that, and he says, I think it makes her uncomfortable too, but they're still dating. And it's funny because even though he's 100 years older and has lived 100 years longer, he still has, and this is something you'll often see, sort of problematic age gap couples, is the guy is frustrated by the woman just being naive of youth and like, why are you? And then he responds himself in a childlike way. But that comes out of the central conflict in this book, which is that they are both in the Magic Kingdom and nothing operates for profit anymore. And so the way that this world sort of operates in terms of determining who gets the remaining scarce resources, because all your needs are met, right? But the thing about humans is we can always find new needs. And so when you have scarce resources beyond your needs and how you allocate them and run them, that gets allocated by a kudos system. And so admission to Disney World is limited. And then getting to stay in Disney World and actually operate and redesign the rides is even more limited. And so he is working, I think it's in various parts of the Magic Kingdom, but the main controversy comes over the Hall of Presidents, which is an old, I don't think I've seen that one actually when I've been to Disney World a couple times when I was little. But there's this new people who come in, and so the old group has been updating the Hall of Presidents a little bit, but trying to keep it basically as it was, and this new group is, no, we're going to make a total, like, immersive VR experience. And he is opposed to that, but they get more kudos, and they kick him out, and then he spirals, behaves terribly with his girlfriend. And also, the other thing is, so there's immortality in this world. It's not only post-scarcity, but immortality is there. But you have to back yourself up, and as I recall, I read it like a couple of years ago, he has glitched, and so he can reset himself from old backups, but he'll lose everything, and he's just determined to win this fight. And I've been thinking about this because I think this is basically, I don't know if it's right in the details, but I think this is a good reflection of what we might actually see in a genuinely post-scarcity world, because even if we met everyone's food and housing and healthcare needs, right, you'd still have people, especially in immortality, overpopulation is going to be a problem, so who gets to have kids becomes a scarce resource. And you have, like, who gets to operate Disney World, right? And actually, I mentioned in an older video that I used to identify as a socialist, though it was really, I was a New Deal social democrat, basically. But I was from Massachusetts, and I lived near Vermont, and I knew about Bernie Sanders' democratic socialism before he was a thing. And actually, it was because of a Harry Turtledove book that I identified as a socialist, and then our Vermont neighbors were like, oh yeah, we have a socialist in Vermont. And I'm like, oh, awesome. But anyway, so I identified as socialist, and then when I went to an actual Trotskyite conference, that was sort of the first nail in the coffin of me really questioning that and moving away from social democracy to identified as libertarian, but I didn't really become full-on libertarian until sort of starting in end of 2018 until about 2023, sort of slowly. And until that point, I was a neoliberal, but I didn't realize that was what I was, and so I said I was libertarianish. And I still say I'm libertarianish because I'm libertarian for, I don't believe social engineering is possible, as opposed to most libertarians I meet just have a moral opposition to social engineering. And I'm like, no, I support a lot of these causes behind the idea of social engineering. I just don't think it's going to work. But anyways, so one of the things in that event that sort of stuck with me really hard is there was this guy who had passed out the leaflet, was organizing, and he was like an old left, like labor guy. And then you had these two like rich college students, which is, you've noticed that's become the whole socialist movement in the United States today. But that was at the time. So there was me, and I'm again upper middle class myself, and my father, who was chaperoning me because I was still in high school, and then the labor organizer guy, and then these two rich college students. And on the drive back, they were talking about, well, how do we solve the problem of scarcity? And again, I had been a social democrat, and I was like, well, obviously markets, and that is obviously not actually compatible with socialism. And so they were like, well, why don't we do it based on seniority. So like if you have a beach house was what they were thinking about, then it would be someone like, and then they pointed to, I forget his name even, I think it started with a W maybe, but they pointed to the old labor organizer guy, and they're like, so people like him who have been in this the longest would get these beach houses. And it was clear to me, like, they are suggesting this because they are getting in on this in the ground floor, and if it happens based on seniority, yeah, he might get it first, but then they get next dibs, right? And I was like, yeah, so you still have scarcity, and socialism is still about how to solve this problem of scarcity. And that is how they did in the Soviet Union, basically, was influence and seniority and connections was how you got scarce resources. And so the kudos system is different than that because it is still a market, right? So the kudos system of down and out in the Magic Kingdom, like, that's still a market, so that's not socialism. This is like a technocratic post-scarcity society. But it is still the people who are sort of most charismatic and also to some degree most unethical are still going to rise to the top and still win these status games because humans are a social primate species. And as Robert Sapolsky has talked about in a number of his books, when you are low status, it's miserable. And so everyone wants to be high status. And the way around that is in our current society to play wealth creation games. But in a world where all scarce resources are determined by kudos, how easy would it be to do? And obviously, the thing is, this guy who came from our world didn't really have an idea to navigate it, and it might be easier. But I just find it interesting because it is what a lot of people would consider utopia, right? Where everyone's basic needs are met, and everybody is immortal now and protected against accident, and everybody has the chance to try to find meaning, and social like resources, the kudos system is like halfway between like a standard market and like democratic voting, so I don't know which one you want to consider it, but it still sounds good on paper. And then he writes basically a debunking of his utopia, but also through a character who contributes to some of his own problems himself, because he is from before the society came and he can't adapt. So I found this interesting and I wanted to talk about it for a while, and I might have more to say about it, but for the time, thanks for listening. I am Magpie, and I will see y'all in the next one.